Behind every popular hero who fights for justice and protects the helpless, there is always a real story, and Zorro's is no exception. What if the myth was based on a true case that ended in 1818 with the liberation of hundreds of Indians, prisoners in San Carlos de Monterrey in Alta California, by a masked man who, sword in hand, defeated many ruthless, leaving an eternal legacy? In a fabulous story that will move you to tears. Stay with me. I promise you won't be disappointed, because I am the documentarian. And this is the real story behind the Zorro. First of all, tell me if you remember what Zorro's horse was called and who you watched the series with. The Zorro, premiered in 1957, follows the adventures of Don Diego de la Vega, a young nobleman who returns to California after studying in Spain. Set in the early 19th century in Los Angeles, under Spanish rule, the story revolves around Diego's double life. A seemingly passive and cultured man, but who secretly becomes the Zorro. A masked vigilante who defends the poor and oppressed from the abuse of the authorities, especially from Commander Captain Monasterio. Now pay attention, because I'm going to tell you the story of Juan de Flores, the first and true Zorro who inspired the legend. In that summer of 1803, Juan de Flores and his cousin Manuel wanted to free a black horse from the abuse of Paco Torres, its cruel owner, who beat it all the time. Both were 11 years old and were about to enter the stable, but disaster struck. The wild, cold-named night was restless. When they went in to free him, they didn't notice that Paco was there with a big club in his hand. And he surprised Manuel, who received such a violent blow that he fell with his neck crushed, unable to breathe. Juan showed what he was made of. He picked up a shovel from the ground and, filled with rage, faced the damn Paco, who was twice his height and weight. He was so filled with anger that he dodged his clubbing and returned 5 blows with the shovel, almost killing him. But 2 others appeared and the boy called out to God for help. The ways of the Lord are mysterious, because no sooner had he finished whispering, "My Jesus, protect me and allow me to save my cousin." Night the colt, untamed, broke the stable doors and charged at the men, leaving them unconscious. Juan, desperate, carried Manuel, who was no longer breathing, on his shoulder, and the brave horse, noticing his courage, bowed down and let them mount. And so, holding his cousin on the colt, they reached Dr. Manuel's lands. He survived but lost the ability to speak. Juan, crying with rage, told him, "Tonight I'm going to sneak into that property like a fox, and I promise you those bastards are going to pay. They will never want to mistreat anyone in there again. You'll see what I'll do to them." But Manuel, who had always been the more religious of the two, wrote his answer on a piece of paper and handed it over. "Juan, I don't want revenge. Promise here that as long as I live, you will be the voice that I lost, one that speaks of forgiveness and not of death as long as I live. Will you keep that anger that dominates you when you see injustice well hidden, Juan?" He shed a tear, moved by his cousin's heart, and replied, "I promise, dear Manuel, you really are a saint. As long as you live, I won't let anger dominate me." Juan's father, who was also in charge of Manuel, decided to send them to Spain immediately. He didn't want to take any risks. If someone accused them, they could be convicted. There was no mercy for children in that time and place. Upon arriving in the old continent, they both enrolled in fencing, horse riding, and wrestling classes. Determined to return one day like the unbeatable heroes that they always dreamed of being. Juan became a champion at 15 years old and was so handsome that the ladies of high society pursued him, until a jealous boyfriend challenged him to a duel. The night just as the death match began, Juan realized he was not going to lose. There was a huge difference in the mastery of the sword, and even more so in confidence. The poor jealous groom was pale while he smiled calmly. With signs, his cousin begged him not to hurt the young man. To himself, Juan thought, will they make Manuel a saint one day? He always wishes well even to enemies. Juan quelled the anger in his heart, heeded Manuel, and disarmed his opponent with a swift move. But instead of killing him, he feigned pain in his arm and suspended the duel, saving the life of the occasional adversary. That act of honor and kindness moved a man who was watching the duel from the shadows and followed the scene with even more interest. When 12 Spanish soldiers surrounded the cousins and tried to arrest them for disturbing the peace of the place, then the stranger came out of the shadows and ordered the soldiers, "Leave those young men and march away from here." Judging by the terrified look on their faces as they fled. Seeing this older man dressed in black and with a sword in hand, they understood that he was someone with a dangerous reputation, and they were right. The old man introduced himself as Dagmanian, the Armenian blade, and told them that he had been a war arts instructor in several kingdoms, and he taught the philosophy of winning even before fighting the battle, and that if they accepted the rules, he would turn them into deadly weapons. Juan de Flores asked him, "Tell me, Mr. Tadmanian, what do you hope to get from the two of us in exchange for your valuable lessons?" The master replied, "Look, I was spying on you to see if you were worthy or if I had to look for someone else from the California region. You see, I have information that a captain by the name of Iglesias has settled there and plans to become a slave trader. He promised that in 2 years he would bring entire villages on board against their will, especially Indians. Have you ever seen a slave ship? I have freed one, and there is nothing worse than seeing women and children tied to a sinking ship, so the only way to save them is before they board. But I am sick. I know I'll die soon, so I need to teach someone else what I know." And putting his hand on Juan's shoulder, he said, "I'm going to turn you into a ghost of the darkness, into a myth. What I'm going to teach you is a lethal and forbidden discipline based on true skill and..." Turning to Manuel, he said, "And you, I'm going to turn you into a hand-to-hand fighter without weapons. You will learn from me how to become stronger and dominate your larger opponents with your arms. I promise you that if you accept the rules within a year, no one will be able to beat you." Manuel signaled to Juan, and the young man asked, "Tell us the rules and you will have our answer." "I warn you that I promise my cousin that as long as he lives, they will never see me dominated by the bravery of hatred." The Armenian replied, "Is that why you are perfect for this mission? The 3 rules I have are simple. Never harm an innocent and only do what is just and necessary to the wicked. The weapons are unsheathed in this order if you want to defeat injustice. First, they must take out a bread, then a book, and finally the sword. 3. Stay away from the cannons. Believe me, I thought I was invincible. But no one can deflect a cannon with the strength of their arms unless they are a saint. And you will be dangerous men, yes, but just men. If a cannon appears, run. Look at me well. A damned slaver preferred to kill everyone with cannon fire rather than surrender, and I was too proud to get out of the way. Now I'm left with only one lung, which makes it hard for me to breathe. Both agreed, and only a year later, Juan was so skilled that he could fight in the dark. He disarmed a professional in just 3 moves and the less virtuous in 2. While Manuel was able to easily knock down a man twice his weight and knock him out in a few seconds. But the Armenian's health was getting worse day by day. Just as he had said, he died. Leaving a letter for the young people, Juan read it with emotion. Under my bed, you will find a secret room. During the night, put on the masks he left and protect the needy. Stop Captain Iglesias before it's too late. In that basement, there was a magnificently forged sword and a completely black suit, mask, cape, and hat for Juan, while Manuel had been left a silver mask. A few days later, the cousins returned to California. Juan's father passed away before they arrived, so the boy, at 16 years old, had to take charge of the enormous estate he inherited. Captain Iglesias, the city's commander, did not attend the funeral, as he would only return in the spring with a garrison of Spanish soldiers to fortify the region. But problems soon arose. It all started when they found out that Paco Torres, the villain who had beaten Manuel when they were children, was whipping the Indians on his plantation, just for fun. And in case a sign from the heavens was needed, Night, the horse they had released, appeared at the ranch with a white mare. The young men thanked God, and dressed in the suits that the Armenian had made for them, they set off for the lands of the evil Paco and his men. Juan found him beating a poor Indian and his children, who were accused of stealing bread, no matter how much the good worker pleaded. They had tied him up with the children to whip them, but a strong voice was heard on the rooftops. If you want to live, you'd better release them immediately, gentlemen. The man looked up, and there he was under the moonlight with his black cape in the wind. Juan's white teeth from his smile cut through the darkness, chilling the evildoers who wondered who the hell faces certain death. With that smile, Paco Torres shouted, "Who are you that comes to my lands like a fox in the night? Here I have 10 armed men. If he laughs, kill him. Kill the fox that got the wrong coop. Show him that there are no chickens here." And there in front of the peasant's gaze, the battle began. Juan jumped from the roof, giving a flying kick that knocked one out. From the ground, he cut the legs of the first 2 who arrived and got up spinning to face 3. At the same time that in a few moves they ended up disarmed and with wounds on both arms. Paco used a short rifle to shoot him, but gracefully. The masked man deflected the weapon in time, using the tip of his sword, and the shot hit the house. 2 of the men ran to the armory to bring more loaded rifles, but they never returned. Inside the property, they had run into Manuel, who, wearing his silver mask, was waiting for them to knock them to the ground and put them to sleep using only his strong arms. In 10 minutes, everything was over. The villains were tied up and the peasants were shouting, "Zorro, Zorro, long live the Zorro." The fame of the masked bandit was such that throughout the region, only he was talked about. Night after night, wherever there was injustice, he appeared, and no one dared to mistreat the humble anymore. Until the evil Captain Iglesias returned with too many Spanish soldiers and 4 young Indian girls. The army men came and went from the city, but the women were nowhere to be seen. Weeks later, Juan organized a dinner in honor of the captain to force him out of his residence. That night, emboldened by the culinary delights and alcohol, Captain Iglesias was boasting about having an ambitious plan, telling those present, The first thing you should know is that I will not leave any Indian in the region. I will also take the loafers from the city, or I swear I will whip them to death. We need to clean these lands of undesirables, and I plan to start with that so-called fox." Challenging him to a duel, Juan interrupted him and, feigning naivety, said, "Everyone here knows me and knows that my cousin Manuel and I keep away from violence. What interests us most is good wine and music. But you, Captain, being such a brave man, don't you think it's better to let the whip rest and feed the hungry rather than flog them? Perhaps if you show generosity and kindness, you will prevent that villainous fox from reappearing. They say no one surpasses him with the sword." Captain Iglesias looked at him like a cockroach for a few seconds and then burst out laughing. He approached with a glass in his hand and toasted with the young man, saying, "Don Juan de Flores, I know everything about you, young man, and about your mute cousin. Leave these matters to real men. Continue with your songs and don't worry about anything. I will put order in San Carlos de Monterrey." Manuel appeared smiling and discreetly dropped a note into his cousin's hand that said, "I have returned from the captain's residence. The damn man had tied up 4 Indian girls in his basement, very beaten, scared to death. They're free now, and they're in our stable. They can't stop shaking. Listen to me, Juan, I know this is going to drive you crazy, but remember that as long as I live, you promised. No fury or revenge, cousin." The fox's eyes turned black with fury. He clenched his teeth and looked at the smiling captain. Talking with 2 gentlemen, he walked with Manuel to the stable. They ran the secret door, and there were the 4 screaming in terror. One of them explained to Juan that they were from the Excellen tribe. The cousins were ready to put an end to this barbarity. One dressed as the fox and the other with his silver mask. People gathered to investigate the source of the screams and found him there. The fox with his cape in the wind under the stars was a true postcard of heroism. He drew his sword and said, "Captain Iglesias, torturer of women and children, you were looking for me. Well, here I am, coward." The captain began to wave his hand and ran shouting, "You are under arrest in the name of the king," lances to him. But the soldiers who had accompanied him were passed out between the kitchen and the living room. Manuel had slammed them to the ground. The fight in the courtyard was brief. The captain's sword flew through the air and the fox gave him a precise spinning kick, seating him against the ground. Our hero had the villain's life in his hands, and by God he wanted to kill him. But Manuel signaled him, and thank goodness he didn't slit his throat, because the coward screamed, "Let me go, or 100 people I have locked up will die. If I don't return, my men will kill them. I'm not lying." The fox believed him immediately and withdrew his sword. Astonished by the captain's cruelty, he let the villain ride away on horseback. But of course, they followed him, and after an hour of riding, they saw him enter a new building, a kind of barracks guarded by dozens of soldiers. The captain asked for the doors to be opened, and once he entered, they began to close them. The fox, riding at top speed last night, entered while they were still open and threw himself at churches until he rolled in the sand that covered the interior of that dark place. The flames illuminated about 30 lancers who surrounded them and more than 100 Indians tied up by thick chains. The captain, defeated and with Juan's sword at his throat, pointed to a bunch of keys hanging high on one of the walls and shouted, "Can you try to save them with those keys, or can you run away with us? And you will learn that you and I are not so different. Cannons! Light the cannons and fire at the Indians!" And with horror, the fox saw that the lances ran out, and 2 huge cannons pointing at the poor prisoners were lit with a slow fuse. No more than 2 minutes, and there would be no one left to save. Juan knew that the end was inevitable unless he ran away. The Armenian was right when he said stay away from the cannons. No one can deflect a cannon with the strength of their arms unless they are a saint. But the faces and screams of the Indians were so heartbreaking that the fox let go of the captain, churches, and instead of escaping, under the keys of the wall and began to unlock the padlocks. But Iglesias stabbed him in the back treacherously and began to laugh uproariously as he ran away, screaming, "Damn fool, could you have escaped?" The fox struggled to its feet, bleeding heavily from the wound, but its eyes were following that lit fuse that enters the cannon. And then it's the end. But Manuel, with his silver mask, appeared immediately. Juan screams no, but the cousin chooses not to listen to him, and with the enormous strength of his arms, he begins to turn one of the cannons pointing towards the other, and the beastly noise, the cloud of smoke, and the debris knock everyone to the ground. When it clears, do they see it? Manuel's shattered body lies motionless. But he did it. He made one of the cannons hit the other directly, saving all the innocents. The Lancers and the captain returned. They wondered how is it possible that a single man could move the cannon. The fox, completely in shock, yelled at them, gritting his teeth. Only a true saint could do it. You shouldn't have killed him. Look at him there, you damn people. You shouldn't have unleashed my fury. The captain told him, smiling, "What do you mean? We're 30 and you're by yourself." But the smile was wiped off their faces when the fox took a rope from the ceiling, cut the counterweight, and flew through the air holding the rope, to do a somersault and land behind them right next to the door. Because the smile left their faces because they thought he was going to run away. However, with an expression of rage in his eyes, he closed the doors behind him, leaving them all inside, and said, "You should not have unleashed my fury. On guard." And with strong sword movements, he was disarming each and every one of the terrified Lancers with such ease that many threw their weapon to the ground and surrendered. Our hero was really angry, and he truly wished to cut off their heads. But out of the corner of his eye, he saw that the Indians had freed themselves from the chains and fought alongside him, knocking down the rest with ease, leaving a circle for the final confrontation between the captain and the fox. Iglesias tried to attack from a distance by throwing a spear, but Juan dodged it, and in a swift moment he cut off his entire hand and stabbed his sword into his foot, pinning him to the ground. Why he didn't kill him amidst the screams no one knows, perhaps because Sant Manuel wouldn't have liked it. Juan de Flores and his cousin prevented hundreds of Indians from being enslaved that night. Captain Iglesias, mutilated and seriously injured, swore revenge, but died a few days later, murdered by one of his soldiers. Manuel's body was adorned and secretly buried by the Indian women he had freed. Juan gifted them the silver mask and his own, telling them, "Return to your lands, ladies, and tell what you have seen." "I'm sorry I can't accompany you, but Captain Iglesias looked at his back and I already feel the burning. I will die soon too." The legend says that Juan de Flores was saved by the tribe's medicines and lived among them. That his mask and sword were given to a brave man named Joaquin Murrieta. In 1850, to date, there have been more than 6 different foxes, and soon there will be another one as well. Maybe it's you. And what happened to Manuel's silver mask? Then, after more than a century, Being venerated by the descendants of the Esalen as a sacred relic, the guardian of that garment met a man of equal heart, dignity, and heroism as Manuel, and gave it to him. It was a wrestler named Rodolfo Guzman Huerta who, when he put it on, felt that power that comes from the heavens. Since that day in 1942, he became known as El Santo, and he is the ultimate hero of millions of people around the world who saw him demonstrate his courage both inside and outside the ring. They say that the good man is not afraid of the darkness, but the unjust tremble at the shadows. Why? Because when night falls, he comes. Why? On his steed, when the moon rises, the brave fox appears, and the evil man he will know how to punish by marking the fox's mushroom. I am the documentarian, and this was The Legend of Zorro.